They say grief makes you see the world differently. They're wrong. It just makes you finally see the world exactly as it is. I stood there in black, accepting condolences, while my husband, just 10 feet away, accepted congratulations for his mistress's pregnancy. He thought my grief made me weak. He forgot that grief is just fuel. My name is Alara Hayes. I am 32 years old, and until recently, I was what you would call a success. By every Boston metric. I was a senior contract lawyer at Innovate Dynamics, one of the most prestigious tech solution firms in the city. My days were spent dissecting clauses worth hundreds of millions. My nights spent in a Beacon Hill apartment where the windows overlooked the gas lamps and cobblestones. A perfect picture of quiet luxury. I had a brilliant career. I had a husband, Marcus, a financial advisor whose charm was his primary currency. He was handsome in that easy, confident way that makes people want to trust him, even if his actual portfolio was less than stellar. This perfect life was built on a foundation of one singular pillar: my father, Richard. My mother died over a decade ago, leaving a void that never truly closed. Dad became my everything. He was a self-made titan, a man who built Innovate Dynamics from a garage concept into a global force. He was my mentor, my protector, and the only person on earth I knew loved me without condition. He did not love Marcus. He never said it, not in so many words. Dad was too shrewd for open conflict. Instead, he expressed it through a tense quiet at dinner, a probing question about Marcus's latest venture, a handshake that lasted just a second too long. "Be careful of men who look for the easy way. Alara," he'd said once, staring into his whiskey. "They always end up taking the most expensive one." I dismissed it as the overprotective nature of a father who thought no one was good enough. Marcus, for his part, was always respectful, always trying, and his family, his mother, Victoria, and his uncle, Julian, were a constant presence. After my mother's death, their attention was a balm. They fawned over me, Victoria bringing by soups and Julian offering endless, solicitous advice. They remembered my birthday. They asked about my day. I was so starved for the simple architecture of a family that I mistook their suffocating interest for genuine affection. I saw it as a bonus, this instant family that embraced me. My father saw them as wolves. This tension became the quiet, grinding backdrop of my marriage. I felt trapped between the man I loved and the man I revered, in an act of misplaced defiance, wanting to prove to Dad that my trust was absolute. I gave Marcus control over my personal finances, not my inheritance, but my own salary, my bonuses, my private investments. It was a gesture meant to show my father that I was my own woman, that I believed in my husband. Marcus was delighted, saying it would be so much more efficient for him to manage it all. I was in my office, reviewing a patent acquisition, when the call came. It was my father's assistant, her voice stripped of all its usual efficiency, leaving only a raw, cracked tremor. "Ilara," she said, "it's your father. There was an event, a massive coronary." I didn't understand. He played squash 3 times a week. He was invincible. "Ilara," she repeated, and this time her voice broke. "He's gone." The pen slipped from my hand. The perfectly curated view from my window, the brick, the gas lamps, the life I had built blurred into an abstract wash of color. The pillar had crumbled. The world didn't just crack. It ceased to exist. The funeral was a performance of grief, not an expression of it. The church was vast, cold, and smelled of lilies and old money. I sat in the front row, a black veil shielding my face. Though I was too numb to cry, I felt like a shadow, a hollow space where a person used to be. Every handshake, every muttered, "I'm so sorry for your loss," felt like an abrasion against raw skin. I was there, but I was not. Marcus, however, was very present. He was magnificent. He glided through the mourners, a hand perpetually on the small of my back. A perfectly somber expression etched onto his handsome face. He was the pillar of strength, the dutiful son-in-law, the loving husband. He managed the ushers, spoke to the reverend, and held me when I swayed, though I swayed from disconnection, not sorrow. He had taken charge of everything, and I heard the whispers how lucky I was to have him during this awful time. When he stood to give the eulogy, his voice was rich and steady. He spoke of my father's vision and legacy. He told a well-rehearsed anecdote about Dad teaching him to sail, one I knew for a fact had never happened. It was eloquent. It was moving. It was utterly, terrifyingly smooth. There was no crack in his voice, no hesitation, no genuine pain. It was a speech, not a remembrance. I watched him perform, a small, cold knot tightening in my frozen gut. It felt wrong. The reception was held back at my father's house, the grand Beacon Hill estate that now felt cavernous and cold, a museum to a man who was gone. The rooms were packed with people in black suits and dresses, their quiet murmuring a dull roar in my ears. I stood near the entryway, a glass of water untouched in my hand, nodding as people filed past with their scripted condolences. I needed air. I needed a moment away from the suffocating scent of flowers and the weight of sympathetic eyes. I slipped away from the main drawing room, moving down the hall toward my father's study, his sanctuary. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I stopped, hearing Marcus's voice. It wasn't the somber, public tone he had used all day. This was low, controlled, and vibrating with an unmistakable energy. It sounded like triumph. "It's okay, Sophie," he was saying. "The old man is gone. It's done. We can finally start." The words didn't compute. Sophie, a business deal. Had Dad's death finalized some merger Marcus had been working on, I pushed the heavy door open. Marcus was standing by Dad's massive mahogany desk, his back to me, phone pressed to his ear. He turned, and the shock on his face lasted only a fraction of a second before it hardened into something I had never seen before. It was not concern. It was not pity. It was annoyance. He ended the call without saying goodbye. "What did you mean?" I whispered. My voice sounded thin, alien in the quiet room. "What's done? What can start?" He looked at me, truly looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time without the filter of our marriage. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He thought I'd figured it out. He thought I already knew. He decided, in that moment, to stop performing. "You might as well know," he said, his voice casual, as if discussing the weather. "Sophie's pregnant, a son." The air evacuated my lungs. The room, with its leather-bound books and the faint scent of Dad's cigar smoke, tilted violently. Sophie, Sophie, our family friend. Sophie, who always laughed a little too loudly at his jokes, who I'd hosted in this very house. I must have stumbled back, because I found myself gripping the doorframe to stay upright. My gaze shot past him, through the open study door, back into the crowded drawing room, and I saw her. She was standing across the room, by the fireplace, talking to his mother, Victoria. She was wearing black, but her dress was fitted, clinging, and as I watched, frozen in a new, sharper dimension of horror, I saw her smile a bright, genuine smile and unconsciously, possessively, rub her hand over the distinct, gentle curve of her stomach. They were all there. My husband, his mistress, his mother, celebrating a new life at my father's funeral, my grief, my father's memory. All of it was just collateral damage in a victory I hadn't even known they were fighting for. The betrayal wasn't a secret. It was an announcement. 10 days. For 10 days. I didn't leave the house. I let the curtains stay drawn. Let the calls go unanswered. Let the casseroles left on the doorstep grow cold. The world believed I was shattered, a widow immobilized by grief, and I was. But shock is an anesthetic, and it was beginning to wear off, leaving something else in its place. Marcus was a perfect imitation of a concerned husband. He brought me tea I didn't drink and soup I didn't eat. He spoke in a low, soothing voice, telling me I didn't have to worry about a thing. And then came the papers. He would sit on the edge of the bed, his expression one of pained duty. "Ilara," he'd sigh. "I hate to bother you with this. It's just procedure. Some preliminary documents from the estate lawyers. Just to get things moving." He would spread them on the comforter. "Just sign here and here. It's to help." My lawyer's brain, which had been dormant, flickered to life. The pages were dense with legalese, granting signatory authority, provisional asset management. I recognized the smell of a trap, even through the fog. "I can't. Marcus," I whispered, pushing them away. "I can't read. The words. They don't make sense right now. Please, not yet." His frustration was a micro-expression, there and gone in a flash, replaced by that mask of profound sympathy. Of course, my love, when you're ready." But he brought them back the next day, and the day after. He wasn't acting alone. Victoria and Julian were a constant presence. They arrived every morning, ostensibly to check on me, but they never came empty-handed. They brought food, platitudes, and more pressure. "Dearest," Victoria would say, stroking my hair, "you look so frail. You must let us take the burden. Julian is more than willing to step in at Innovate, just to keep things steady for you." Julian would nod, his face a mask of solemn concern. "Richard wouldn't want you to be worried about board meetings and payroll, Ilara. It's a family matter now. We will help you manage this transition. It's what you need." Their concern was suffocating, and I watched them. I watched how Julian's eyes scanned the furniture, lingering on my father's art collection. I watched how Victoria would straighten a silver frame, her fingers assessing its weight. They weren't visitors. They were assessors. I watched Marcus. His laptop, once left open on the kitchen counter, was now perpetually locked and by his side. His phone, which he used to leave screen up, was now face down, and he took his calls on the terrace, his voice a low, urgent murmur that the glass door couldn't quite contain. He was hiding. In my father's house. He was hiding from me. The grief was still there, a heavy, cold stone in my chest, but it was no longer a disabling fog. It was becoming a lens. The pain was hardening, solidifying from a blunt force trauma into something sharp, something focused. The weakness they were counting on was evaporating. In its place, a cold, analytical suspicion was taking root. On the 10th day, I was pretending to clean, an act of domesticity so out of character it was the perfect cover. I was gathering his suits from the closet, telling him I'd have them sent out. He was in the shower, the sound of water drumming against the marble. I went through his pockets as a matter of course. Receipts, some loose change, his wallet. And then, in the inner breast pocket of his charcoal gray jacket, the one he wore to the funeral, my fingers closed around a single cold piece of metal. It was a key, just one, on a simple, unmarked silver ring. It wasn't a key to our apartment. It wasn't a key to his Mercedes. It wasn't a key to this house. It was a key to a life I knew nothing about. I closed my fist around it, the serrated edges digging into my palm, and slipped it into my own pocket. The water in the bathroom shut off. I stood perfectly still, the key a sudden, heavy anchor of reality in my hand. The next morning, I told Marcus I was going to the spa. "A day of pampering," I said, my voice a convincing imitation of fragile. "Victoria's idea. She said I need to take care of myself." He bought it instantly, relief washing over his face. A pampered wife was a distracted wife. He even kissed my forehead, a gesture that now felt reptilian. "Good, that's good. Ilara, you deserve it." I didn't go to the spa. I took a cab to a discreet office building in the financial district. I bypassed the family attorney Julian had so helpfully recommended, a man I was certain was on his payroll. Instead, I went to see Mr. Eris, the man who had been my father's personal counsel for 30 years. He was old school, razor sharp, and his loyalty to my father was absolute. When his secretary showed me in, Eris stood, his expression a mixture of deep condolence and profound relief. "Ilara," he said, his voice gravelly. "I was beginning to worry. I've been trying to reach you, but your husband, he has been insistent on managing all communications." "He has," I said, my voice flat, stripped of all emotion. The lawyer in me was now fully awake. The grieving daughter was locked in a back room. "I need to see my father's will, the real one." Eris nodded, a grim understanding passing between us. He didn't waste time. He slid a thick, bound document across his polished desk. Richard was a brilliant man, Ilara, and he was not a trusting one. The will is ironclad. You, and only you, inherit everything. Innovate Dynamics, the properties, the entire portfolio. His control is absolute, and it passes directly to you. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Marcus has been insistent. He has papers. He wants me to sign control over to Julian. "Of course he does," Eris said, his tone laced with ice. "Which brings us to the addendum. Richard added a special protective clause about 8 months ago, shortly after you gave Marcus access to your personal accounts. He was concerned." Eris leaned forward. "Ilara, what do you know about your husband's family before Marcus?" "I mean, not much," I admitted. "They had a consulting firm. I think Julian mentioned it once. Said it didn't work out." "It didn't work out because your father drove them into bankruptcy," Eris said bluntly. "It was about 20 years ago. Their company was called Apex Solutions. They were our direct competitor. Julian and Victoria's father ran it. They were aggressive, sloppy, and, frankly, corrupt. Richard initiated a hostile takeover based on their own cooked books. It was a brutal fight. When the dust settled, Apex was gone. Innovate Dynamics took their clients, their contracts, and their market share. The family lost everything. Their reputation, their standing, their fortune, everything. The pieces clicked into place with the sickening finality of a cell door slamming shut. The fawning attention, the manufactured family, the instant embrace. "It was never about me," I whispered. "It was always about you." Eris corrected me, his voice firm. "You were the only way back in. You were the long game. A 20-year grudge. Ilara, they put their son, their nephew, into your path. They waited for you to marry him. And then they waited for your father to die." My marriage wasn't a partnership. It was an infiltration, a long con, plotted over dinners and holidays, fueled by a 2-decade-old hatred. He has no rights." "Then," I asked, the words tasting like ash. "Legally none," Eris said, tapping the will. "Marcus Hayes has no claim to a single dollar of Richard's estate. He has no authority at Innovate Dynamics. He is your husband, nothing more. The only way he or his family gets their hands on your father's company is if you, Ilara Hayes, a grieving widow deemed too distraught to manage her own affairs, willingly sign that control over to them." He looked at me, his eyes as sharp as his legal mind. "Which is precisely what they are trying to make you do. They're counting on your grief. Your father was counting on your strength." I left Aris's office with a cold, clear purpose. The will was the shield. Now I needed the sword. And the first place to look was the very thing I had so foolishly handed over my own money. My salary, my bonuses from Innovate Dynamics, my private investments, the entire portfolio I had built before my father's death. I had given Marcus convenience, and he had used it as a weapon. I met Eris again that evening. This time with a third person in the room, a woman named Calloway, who headed a top-tier digital forensics team. She wore a simple black dress and had the eyes of a hawk. "Mr. Hayes is arrogant," I told her, my voice low and steady. "He boasts about his secure cloud drive. He runs all his business from it, his personal life, everything. He thinks he's untouchable. I need you to touch him. If it's digital, it's traceable," Calloway said, her voice as flat as her gaze. "His arrogance is our entry point. Eris provided the legal framework, authorizing the investigation based on suspected spousal fraud against my personal assets. Calloway and her team went to work. It took them less than 12 hours. The call came at 3 in the morning. We're in," Calloway said. "We have it all." I was at Eris's office an hour later, the city dark and silent around us. Calloway had a laptop open on the conference table, the screen glowing. What I saw made the blood freeze in my veins. It wasn't just sloppy. It was a systematic, calculated plunder. File by file. Calloway showed us the financial reports. Marcus had been siphoning money from my salary for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, then larger. Tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of dollars, rerouted through a series of shell corporations before landing in a single encrypted offshore account in the Cayman Islands. An account under the name MVS Holdings. Marcus, Victoria. S. I murmured. Sophie. Eris finished, his face grim. Then came the emails. They weren't just careless, they were damning. A clear, explicit thread between Marcus, Victoria, and Julian, outlining the long-term plan. My stomach churned as I read their words. "She's too smart. She won't just hand it over," Marcus had written to Julian a year ago. "She will when her father is gone." Julian wrote back, "The man is her anchor. Cut it, and she drifts. You just need to be the loving husband, the rock she clings to. Victoria will handle the emotional pressure. The grieving widow will be desperate for help. She'll sign anything to make the pain stop." Another from Victoria to Marcus. "Remember the goal. The company is ours. It was stolen from us. This is justice. Ilara is just the key. Use her." They had plotted it all. The marriage, the waiting game, the calculated psychological pressure the moment my father died. My grief wasn't just an opportunity for them. It was a cornerstone of their entire strategy. But the final folder was the one that broke me. It was labeled medical. I clicked it. Invoices. Dozens of them. From a high-end fertility clinic in New York. The patient's name was Sophie. The procedure was in vitro fertilization. IVF. A notoriously expensive, grueling process. I saw the dates, the multiple attempts, the prescriptions, the consultations, all totaling well over $100,000. And then I saw the payment receipts, the transfer confirmations, the source account for every single dollar, for every single procedure that went into creating my husband's new heir. It was my personal checking account, the one I had given him access to, the one funded by my salary. He hadn't just been stealing from me to fund his affair. He hadn't just been planning to take my father's company. He had used my money, the money I earned as a lawyer at my father's company, to pay for the creation of the child he was having with another woman. They had literally made me pay to replace myself. A sound escaped my throat, something between a gasp and a sob, but it was devoid of sadness. It was the sound of something breaking, yes, but also of something new and terrible being forged in its place. The cold suspicion was gone. Now, there was only ice. The forensics report gave us more than just bank account numbers. It gave us an address. It was a penthouse in the Seaport District, a gleaming tower of glass and steel overlooking the harbor. The rent was $12,000 a month, and every cent of it had been auto-drafted from the account where I deposited my bonuses. I stood before the heavy walnut door on the 42nd floor, my heart hammering a cold, hard rhythm against my ribs. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the single silver key I had found in Marcus's suit jacket 10 days ago. It slid into the lock with a terrifying smoothness. No resistance. It belonged here. I turned it, heard the click, and pushed the door open. I expected a love nest. I expected to see evidence of an affair. But what I walked into was something far more grotesque. I walked into a museum of my own stolen life. The apartment was decorated in a style that mocked my own home, but it was the specific objects that made bile rise in my throat. Hanging above the limestone fireplace was a large oil painting, Sunflowers in August. It was my mother's favorite piece, the one she had bought in Paris the year before she died. 3 years ago. Marcus had told me it was destroyed during a renovation move. He had held me while I wept over the loss of that last tangible connection to her. He had lied. It wasn't destroyed. It was here, perfectly lit, the centerpiece of his mistress's living room. I walked further in, my legs feeling like lead. To my left, a glass display cabinet caught the light. Inside sat 6 vintage Patek Philippe watches, my father's collection. Marcus had told me just last week that they had been misplaced during the chaotic inventory of the estate. He had promised to file an insurance claim. He hadn't lost them. He had simply moved them to his real home. I wondered how long it would take you. The voice came from the kitchen area. I turned. Sophie was standing there, leaning against the marble island. She was wearing a silk robe that I recognized. I had bought it for myself 2 Christmases ago, and it had disappeared from the laundry. She was drinking herbal tea, her hand resting casually on the swell of her pregnancy. She didn't look scared. She didn't look ashamed. She looked bored. "You stole my mother's painting," I said, my voice shaking not with sadness, but with a rage so pure it felt like clarity. "You stole my father's watches. You're living in a house paid for with my money, wearing my clothes." Sophie laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She walked toward me, her movements languid and heavy with the child she was carrying. "Oh, Alara, you still don't get it. Do you? You think this is about you. You think this is just about sleeping with your husband." She stopped in front of the painting, looking up at it with a possessive sneer. "This isn't about you. It's about what was taken from us." "Us?" I asked. "My father," she said, turning her gaze to me. "My father, Julian." The world tilted on its axis. Julian, Marcus's uncle, the man who had been bringing me soup and advice for the last 10 days. "Julian is your father," I whispered. "Biologically, yes. Though we kept that off the books to make the integration easier," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Your father destroyed my grandfather's company 20 years ago. He ruined my father. He ruined Marcus's family. We grew up hearing the stories of what Richard stole from us. We grew up hungry while you grew up in that mansion on Beacon Hill." She stepped closer, her eyes burning with a lifetime of inherited hatred. "This isn't an affair, Alara. This is a repossession. The painting, the watches, the money that's just interest. We wanted the company. We wanted the legacy. And since we couldn't beat Richard in the boardroom, we sent Marcus to beat him in the bedroom. And now that the old man is dead, we are taking it all back." She patted her stomach. "And this baby. This is the heir that should have been born into wealth. Not you. Innovate Dynamics should have been my family's. You were just the price we had to pay to get the keys back." I looked at her. This woman I had thought was a friend, this cuckoo bird sitting in the nest I had built, incubating a future designed to erase me. The horror of the physical betrayal, the sex, the lies was nothing compared to this. This was a dismantling of my entire existence. "Get out," she said, turning back to her tea, "before I call security and have you removed for trespassing in my home." I didn't scream. I didn't attack her. I looked at my mother's painting one last time, burning the image into my mind. Then I turned and walked out. I didn't need to fight her here. Not in this apartment. I had a much bigger battlefield in mind. I walked out of that penthouse, and the cold metal of the key felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. Julian's daughter. The revelation didn't send me into a new spiral of despair. It did something else. It cauterized the wound, the shock, the pain. The last lingering embers of the wife I had been, it all turned to ash. What was left was a cold, hard, structural anger. This was not a betrayal. This was a conspiracy. This was not a broken heart. This was a hostile takeover. I drove back to my father's house, my mind clear for the first time in days. The fog of grief was gone, replaced by the sharp, crystalline focus of a lawyer preparing for trial. When I walked in, Marcus was on the sofa, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, his face a mask of mild annoyance. "Where were you? Ilara Victoria was here. She was worried." I let my coat drop to the floor. I let my shoulders slump. I summoned the image of the woman I had been 10 days ago, the hollowed-out, fragile creature. I needed to think. I walked over and sat in the armchair opposite him. I didn't cry. I just looked empty. "Marcus," I whispered, and he looked up, sensing a shift. "You're right." His brow furrowed. "Right about what?" "All of it," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "You, Victoria, Julian, you were right. I can't do this." I waved a hand vaguely around the room, at the empire my father had built. "I can't run the company. I can't manage the estate. I'm just not strong enough. Not without Dad." I watched him try to conceal the jolt of victory. He failed. His eyes lit up, just for a second, before he composed his features back into a mask of solemn, loving concern. He moved from the sofa to kneel in front of me, taking my hands in his. They were warm. I felt nothing. "Oh, Ilara," he said, his voice dripping with synthetic pity. "You are strong, but you don't have to be." "We are here. We will take the burden. I need Julian," I said, looking him straight in the eye, letting him see the surrender. He understands the business. He knows what he's doing. I want to ask him to step in. As interim CEO, just to handle everything. I trust him. I trust you. He pulled me into a hug, pressing my face into his shoulder so I couldn't see the smile I knew was spreading across his face. "You are doing the right thing, my love," he murmured. "This is the best way. I'll call him. We'll arrange it all." "No," I said, pulling back. "I'll do it. It has to be formal. It has to be official. For the board." I went to my father's study. I sat in his high-backed leather chair. It no longer felt too big. I opened my laptop and began to set the board. My fingers were steady. I was no longer a wife. I was the acting chairwoman of Innovate Dynamics, and I was calling a meeting. First, I sent an email to Marcus, Victoria, and Julian. The subject: formal meeting transition of Innovate Dynamics leadership and estate management. I scheduled it for 48 hours from now, 10 a.m. sharp, in the main corporate boardroom. "As per our discussions," I wrote, "this meeting will serve to execute the necessary signatory documents to appoint provisional management and finalize the immediate estate transition." I was laying out the cheese. Second, I sent a separate, encrypted email to the full board of directors. This one was marked urgent and strictly confidential. The subject: emergency board meeting succession and corporate security threat. "A critical matter has emerged," I wrote. "That constitutes a direct and immediate threat to the integrity, assets, and leadership of Innovate Dynamics. Your presence is mandatory. Do not discuss this with anyone. Mr. Eris, our corporate counsel, will be presiding with me." Third, I called the lead forensic accountant. "I need the full report, printed, bound, 10 copies. And I need you there to present it." Finally, I made one last arrangement. I found the home address for Julian's wife, Beatrice, a devout, unassuming woman who ran one of the city's largest charities and who, I was certain, knew nothing. I didn't email her. I had a formal invitation messengered to her door, embossed with the corporate logo. Mrs. Beatrice Warren is cordially invited to attend a private reception in her honor to formally recognize the extraordinary support her family, particularly her husband Julian, has provided to Ilara Hayes during her time of bereavement. I knew she would come. It was the public acknowledgement she had always craved. The trap was set. Every piece was in motion. They were all coming to the boardroom for their coronation. I was coming to see them executed. The boardroom of Innovate Dynamics was designed to intimidate. It was a vast expanse of polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the Boston skyline, a view that usually cost billions to acquire. Today, however, the real power wasn't in the view. It was in the silence. I sat at the head of the table, my father's chair. For the first time since the funeral, I was not wearing black. I wore a tailored navy suit, sharp enough to cut glass, with a white silk blouse underneath. My hair was pulled back in a severe, immaculate chignon. There were no tissues in my hand, no red rims around my eyes. The grieving widow had been dismissed. The heiress had taken the floor. To my right sat Mr. Heiress, looking like a gargoyle ready to snap, his hands folded over a thick stack of files. To my left was the lead forensic auditor, Calloway, her laptop open and humming. Lining the long sides of the table were the 12 members of the board of directors, men and women of immense influence who looked grim, serious, and expectant. And in the corner, seated in a plush guest chair with a cup of tea, was Beatrice Warren, Julian's wife. She looked small and confused, clutching her purse, smiling nervously at the board members who were studiously ignoring her. She had no idea why she was here, only that she had been invited for a special honor. At exactly 10 o'clock, the double doors swung open. They walked in like royalty. Julian led the way, his chest puffed out, already carrying the air of a CEO. Victoria followed, draped in expensive mourning silks that looked more like a costume than a tribute. And Marcus brought up the rear, looking somber and supportive, ready to hold his fragile wife's hand as she signed away her birthright. They were smiling. It was a subtle, predatory look of anticipation. Then they stopped. The smile died on Julian's face first. He froze mid-step, his eyes darting from the full board to Aris, then to the auditors, and finally landing on me. The confidence drained out of him like water from a cracked glass. Victoria bumped into him, annoyed, before looking up and letting out a small, strangled gasp. Marcus just stood there, his hand half extended towards me, his mouth opening and closing without sound. They had expected a private signing with a broken woman. They had walked into a tribunal. Ilara, Marcus finally managed to say, his voice cracking. What is this? We thought this was a family meeting. It is, I said. My voice was calm, projected perfectly to the back of the room. It did not waver. Please, take a seat, all of you. I didn't gesture to the seats next to me. I gestured to the 3 empty chairs at the far end of the table, facing the board, the position of the accused. I don't understand, Julian blustered, though his face was gray. He tried to regain his footing. Ilara, sweetheart, this seems unnecessary. We just need to sign the interim papers so I can take the load off your shoulders. Why is the entire board here? Sit down, Julian, I commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order given with the full weight of my 51% controlling interest. He sat. They all did. Beatrice, sensing the tension, gave a little nervous wave to her husband. Julian, she squeaked. They invited me. Isn't it lovely? Julian looked at his wife, sweat beading on his forehead. He couldn't even answer her. I stood up. The room went deathly silent. I placed my hands flat on the mahogany table and leaned forward, locking eyes with Marcus. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, I began, my tone icy and professional. We are gathered here today not to discuss my father's estate, nor to appoint interim management. We are here to address a critical security breach. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. We are here to discuss a hostile attempt to seize Innovate Dynamics. I continued. From within. The color vanished from Victoria's face completely. Marcus looked like he was going to be sick. The air in the room grew heavy, electric with the impending violence of the truth. A conspiracy, I said, involving corporate espionage, fraud, and the systematic embezzlement of company funds. Ilara, stop! Marcus hissed, his eyes darting to the board members. You're upset. You're not making sense. Let's go outside and talk about this. I am not upset, Marcus, I said, signaling Calloway to connect her laptop to the main screen. I have never been more clear-headed in my entire life. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. It didn't show a presentation title. It showed a bank routing number and a name, MVS Holdings. Now, I said, sitting back down in my father's chair. Let's look at the ledger. I nodded to Ms. Calloway. She stood, and the boardroom, already silent, seemed to hold its breath. Good morning, Calloway said, her voice devoid of emotion. For the past 48 hours, my team has been conducting a full forensic audit on a specific offshore account, MVS Holdings, and tracing its funding sources. The main screen lit up with a complex web of flowcharts, lines, and account numbers that made Victoria and Julian visibly flinch. The source of the funding, Calloway continued, was not Innovate Dynamics. It was, exclusively, the personal salary, bonus, and private investment accounts of Mrs. Ilara Hayes. A low murmur went through the board. This, Calloway stated, clicking to the next slide, is a systematic embezzlement of Mrs. Hayes's personal funds, totaling just over $1.2 million over the last 24 months. That's a lie, Victoria shrieked, jumping to her feet. He had permission. Ilara gave him permission to manage her money. Permission to manage, Eris cut in, his voice like gravel, is not permission to steal, and we know precisely why he stole. Eris rose, his gaze locking onto Julian. Which brings us to motive. I'm sure the older members of this board remember a competitor from 2 decades ago, a company called Apex Solutions. A few of the directors nodded grimly. Apex Solutions, Eris continued, was driven into bankruptcy and liquidated by this company after Richard Hayes exposed their fraudulent accounting practices, a company run by Julian and Victoria's father. The air was sucked from the room. This is slander, Julian roared, his face purple. This is ancient history. It has nothing to do with anything. It has everything to do with everything, I said, my voice cutting through his. It explains the 20-year grudge. It explains the long con. It explains why my husband was strategically placed in my path to wait for my father to die. I pressed a key on my laptop. The room's high-fidelity speakers came to life. Marcus's voice filled the room, low and urgent, from a call I had recorded in my father's house. She's not signing, Julian, his voice said. She's just sitting there. She's too smart, even now. Then, Julian's voice replied, then push her. She's broken. Victoria will handle the emotional side. Keep telling her she's frail. You just keep reminding her how lost she is. She'll sign. Grieving widows are easy. You recorded me, Marcus whispered, horrified. In our home. In my father's home, I corrected him. While you were plotting to exploit my grief. I looked back at the board. But where did that $1.2 million go? It didn't just sit in the Caymans. Ms. Calloway. The screen changed. A lease agreement. A penthouse in the seaport. $12,000 a month. Paid for, I said. By me. The image changed again. A photograph. My mother's favorite painting. Sunflowers in August, hanging over a fireplace. The next photo. My father's vintage watch collection, sitting in a glass case. He didn't just steal my money, I told the board, my voice shaking with controlled rage. He stole my inheritance. He stole my mother's memory and my father's legacy. and he gave it all to his mistress. This is a personal dispute, Ilara. Julian snapped, trying to regain control. A marriage issue. It is not a corporate matter. It became a corporate matter, Julian, Eris said, stepping forward. When you conspired to install a fraudulent party to manage this company's assets. You see, the board is also interested to learn that Marcus Hayes hasn't been a licensed financial advisor for 2 years. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a guillotine dropping. His license, Eris continued, reading from a document, was permanently revoked by FINRA for gross mismanagement of client funds. A fact that you, Julian, and you, Victoria, were both aware of, as you were both named in the original complaint that bankrupted several of your clients. Marcus slumped, his head in his hands. This isn't a divorce, Mr. Warren, I said. This is a multi-state criminal conspiracy to commit wire fraud and install an unlicensed, disbarred individual at the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Victoria was shaking, muttering, no, no, no. Julian looked like a ghost. And there is just one last exhibit, I said, my voice softening. The reason for all of this. The new life my husband was so excited to start. The screen changed one last time. Invoices. Dozens of them. From a high-end fertility clinic in New York. $140,000, Calloway announced. For multiple rounds of in vitro fertilization. For a patient named Sophie. I turned my full attention to the corner of the room, to the small, confused woman clutching her teacup. Beatrice, I said. Mrs. Warren, I am so sorry you had to be here. You were invited today, so you could finally meet your husband's family. She looked at me, her eyes wide with terror. I don't understand. That, I said, pointing to the invoices on the screen, is for the child your husband is having, a child paid for with my money. Julian, she whispered. I stood up and walked toward her. And the mother, Beatrice, is his daughter, Sophie. The porcelain teacup shattered on the polished floor. Beatrice's second whisper of Julian was broken by a horrifying, high-pitched keen, the sound of a life shattering. She collapsed sideways, a cascade of beige wool and pearls, the porcelain teacup exploding against the mahogany floor. Victoria's grief-stricken mask evaporated, replaced by a contorted face of pure venom. She lunged to her feet, her chair scraping violently. You ungrateful cur, we gave you a family, we took you in, we comforted you. And this is how you repay us, by siding with a dead man over your own husband. I'll sue you, Julian roared, finally finding his footing. He was red-faced, vibrating with the impotent rage of a cornered animal. I'll sue this entire board. I'll sue you. Eris, I'll have you disbarred for this. This ambush, and you. Ilara slander. Defamation. You'll be penniless by the time I'm through. Eris, who had remained seated, looked up with an expression of profound boredom. Sit down, Julian. You aren't suing anyone. You've been complicit in a multi-year conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud. You aided and abetted a disbarred, unlicensed criminal in an attempt to gain control of a publicly traded corporation. If you say one more word, I will personally add threatening the chairwoman to the criminal referral we are sending to the U.S. Attorney's Office. You are finished. The fight vanished. It evaporated as if it had never been. Julian fell back into his chair, his mouth open, his skin a sickly gray. Victoria was sobbing, a harsh, ugly sound. And Marcus. Marcus simply disintegrated, the charming husband, the suave financial advisor, the triumphant son-in-law, all of it dissolved, leaving behind a whimpering, terrified man. It was them, he cried, his voice a pathetic wail. He pointed a shaking finger at his mother and uncle. It was their plan. The 20-year grudge. They hated him. They pushed me. I just wanted to be successful. Ilara, please. He staggered toward me, his hands outstretched, his face a grotesque mask of tears and desperation. Please, I love you. I always loved you. Sophie, the baby. That was just for them. It was for the plan. We can fix this. I'll give the money back. Please. Ilara, don't let them do this to me. I looked at him. I saw him for the first time a hollow shell, filled only with the ambitions and hatreds of others. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just absence. I turned my gaze from him to Mr. Davies, the oldest member of the board and my father's closest friend. He understood. I call for a vote, Davies said, his voice like thunder in the silent room. A motion to immediately sever any and all contracts, partnerships, and pending projects with Mr. Julian Warren and any of his affiliated entities, citing gross criminal misconduct. Seconded, a director snapped. All in favor. 12 hands went up. Motion passes unanimously, Davies declared. I make a second motion. To authorize Mr. Aris and our corporate counsel to pursue all available criminal and civil charges against Julian Warren, Victoria Hayes, and Marcus Hayes, seeking maximum damages and restitution. Seconded. All in favor. Again. 12 hands. Marcus was still muttering. No, no, Ilara, please. My son. Our family. I looked at him one last time. You wanted a new life. Marcus, I said, my voice quiet, but it sliced through the room. Congratulations. You have won. I motioned with my head toward Beatrice, who was being helped up, her eyes vacant with shock. And now you get to watch your child, the one you created with my money, be systematically disinherited from his grandfather's entire fortune. I suspect Beatrice's lawyers will be far more effective at financial recovery than you ever were. The boardroom doors opened. I had, of course, scheduled them for 10:30. 2 large men in immaculate black suits stepped inside. Gentlemen, I said, my voice clear. These 3 individuals are trespassing. Please escort them out of my building. No! Victoria shrieked. Julian was speechless. Marcus just cried, a pathetic, sobbing mess as he was hauled to his feet. Ilara, please! I didn't watch them being dragged out. I listened. I listened to the sounds of their protests fading down the hall, to the heavy thud of the double doors closing, and then, finally, to the profound, cleansing silence. The board members quietly gathered their papers and filed out, each one stopping to give me a respectful nod. Aris placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezed once, and left. I was alone. I sat in the vast, quiet room. The skyline of my city spread out before me. I looked at the empty seat at the head of the table. My father's chair. My chair. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the set of documents Aris had prepared for me yesterday. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I didn't pause. I didn't reflect. I reached into my pocket and took out my father's heavy, gold-nibbed fountain pen, the one he gave me when I passed the bar. I uncapped it. I signed my name. I put the pen down. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from. Please let us know in the comments, share your thoughts on Ilara's story, and subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories. Remember to like this video, and if you enjoyed this journey, please hit that hype button to help it reach more listeners.